there is something I want to address about the Norwegian society, which is very concerning to me and very serious. And we need to take this seriously. I have seen this myself as a patient, client, user of the healthcare and welfare system. And it is a lack of willingness in the employees to define words they are using. So instead of slowing down and saying, okay, I am using the word anger to you, so I will define the word anger before we continue this conversation so that we know that we are talking about the same thing. Instead of doing that, employees in the public system, in the healthcare and welfare system, they are doing rapid fire, what I call rapid fire conversations. So they are just spewing out words, zero definitions, no slowing down, and what happens then is that the patient, client, user, they never get to actually express what they need to tell the employee. And the reason why this is very serious is that it is the employees in the healthcare and welfare system who are responsible for granting resources and money where it is needed. In Norway, we don't pay the services ourselves. We don't go and buy services in the healthcare and welfare system. We pay a lot of tax in Norway. We have an extreme taxation on everything in Norway. And the reason for that is because we are to get the so-called free healthcare and welfare when we need it. But if this is a system that is going to function, the worker in the system, the healthcare worker, the welfare worker, has to understand where to use money, where to use resources, where to use human resources. And if you can't listen, if you refuse to have a proper conversation with the client, the patient, the user, whatever, if you as an employee in the public system plainly refuses to have a proper conversation, you have no idea what the people need. So you just grant money and resources very, very randomly. So you just give some money here and you give some money there and you use some resources here and you use some resources there, but you have absolutely zero idea if you actually reach the people needing it. But what is even more concerning here isn't just the lack of the workers' willingness to define what they are talking about. It's not just the lack of proper conversations. What is more concerning is that in the educations, in the reading material of these educations the workers in the system have, it's there. It's not like we go to the reading material and we can't find any definitions. We can't find any kind of advice saying you need to have proper conversations. So there is this discrepancy between what we can see in the reading materials for those educations and what the workers who have been through those educations actually are doing. There is a huge discrepancy. And I will use one example from, this is okay, a fairly old book, but still. And this is Fruzzetti, High Conflict Couple. And he is defining here, it's a whole section of a page, it's half a page, and he's using half a page on defining a word, so that you, the reader of the book, is supposed to understand what he is saying. Because if you can't understand what he is saying in this book, there was no point in reading the book, because you are, I don't know. So you need definitions. And he is saying in the section, the problem of anger in relationships. Many people argue that anger is a normative and often healthy emotion that it motivates us to stick up for our rights, values, boundaries, and helps protect us in dangerous situations. So here Fruzzetti is starting to offer up definitions of the word anger. And then he goes on, this all may be true, but there is a very corrosive aspect to anger in close relationships that often overshadows any possible benefits. So, Fruzzetti is first offering you a definition of anger, but then he's saying that's not the definition I'm using, I'm talking about something else. So he goes on, for purposes of this discussion, anger is not synonymous with annoyance, dislike, or frustration. It can be healthy and constructive to express those emotions in close relationships because that kind of expression can reasonably be heard and understood and can result in positive changes and increased intimacy. So, what we now have seen is that Fruzzetti, when he is from page 23 and onwards in this book talking about anger, when he is using the word anger, he is not talking about the healthy emotion, not an emotion that motivates us to stick up for our rights, values, boundaries, and that helps protect us in dangerous situations. He is not talking about what he calls annoyance, dislike, or frustration, because those emotions, those words, are something that to Fruzzetti means still something that can reasonably be heard and understood and can result in positive changes and increased intimacy. So Fruzzetti has now used this much. He has used this much on telling us that he is not talking about the positive anger. So if you feel anger and you act on anger that results in something positive, that is not what Fruzzetti is talking about here. And then he continues. In contrast, feeling angry means having increased negative emotional arousal. This in turn churns out judgments. Judgments then increase arousal, which produces more judgments, which leads to inaccurate and ineffective expressions of emotions and desires, which then results in misunderstanding and conflict and rarely leads to effective changes. Thus, angry feelings and angry expressions in close relationships almost always create distance, and distance is the enemy of closeness and intimacy. So, after using this much on telling us about positive definitions of anger and saying that he is not using that definition, he's not talking about positive effects of anger. So the word anger is in his book here is not about the positive consequences of anger. And then he used the same amount to tell us that he's talking about negative consequences. So anger, the word anger for Fruzzetti, in this book, so that you shall understand what Fruzzetti is talking about, anger means increased negative emotional arousal that in turn churns out judgments. So you feel something, there is an arousal in you of a negative emotional value, and that makes you into a judgmental person. So you make judgments, you don't put up boundaries. It's not the emotion that makes you put up boundaries, but it's an emotion that makes you become judgmental of your partner. And it leads to inaccurate and ineffective expressions of emotions and desires. So this emotion in you, in turn, turns into that you become less effective in the way you are talking. So it is an emotion and the acting upon an emotion that actually sabotages the situation. and it rarely leads to effective changes. So, in contrast to the definition of the word anger, where people are talking about something that can lead to a positive change and actually make your relationships better, Fruzzetti is very clearly here stating that he is talking about the angry feelings and the angry expressions that create distance, so that you don't get closeness and you don't get intimacy. And this is so much he is using on helping the reader understand what he means about the word anger. So it's there in the book, in the reading material. But this here, that is so important in this book, and that takes up half a page in this book, and you find it on page 23, so that you know that from page 23 and onwards, this is what Fruzzetti means with the word anger. This is lacking in Norway in the healthcare system and welfare system. So when you are in a meeting with someone working in the healthcare system or welfare system, whatever service it might be, the family services, the commune administration, whatever it might be, that is lacking. But when I went through this now, it should become very, very clear why it is important to have this definition. Because the word anger in this situation, in this example, can mean so wildly different things. Anger can be very, very, very positive, and anger is a word that also can denote something very, very, very negative. And Fruzzetti wants us to know that in this book he is talking about the negative definition, that the definition of the word that is pointing to something very negative. But at the same time he is saying some people in other books will use it in the complete opposite way. But that's not what Fruzzetti is talking about. So, why is workers in the Norwegian system, in the Norwegian services, why are they skipping this? It's very easy to understand when we read this book why it is important to define your words. Because if you think for the rest of this book, if you think for these pages here that Fruzzetti is talking about the positive emotion, anger, that anger is to stick up for your rights, values and boundaries and help to protect you in dangerous situations. If you believe that, you will misunderstand the whole book. The absolutely whole book, and it will have no effect on you. It would just ruin whatever you wanted to use this book for. So that should make it very clear why we need to define words. But Norwegian workers don't. They refuse. So there is this discrepancy between what we actually find in the educations of these workers and what they are actually doing. This is a huge problem because these employees in the healthcare and welfare system are the people who are there to make sure that our tax money, that our resources, both human resources and material resources in Norway, is used in the right way, where it is needed. But they don't speak properly. They don't have proper conversations. When a client user patient comes to one of these employees in the public services, there is absolutely zero understanding between them. It's all just very random because they don't define their words. And I have been through this as a private person so many times that the people I talk to, who are supposed to be professionals, who are supposed to be responsible for retrieving the correct information about me from me, they don't care at all. But it's right here in the reading materials, in their education. So what is going on here? How come that we see this, we find this very, very clearly and very, very easily understandable in the reading materials of these educations, but the second these workers start in their first job, they stop caring? There is something going on in Norway here that is very, very worrying. And it's not because it's not in the education. It's in the education, it's in the reading material. It's right there, I'm looking straight at it. But when these employees start their jobs in the public system, they completely skip that step. They don't care at all anymore. It's like this. There is something happening here. And the only way that it's understandable, I think, is that they don't want to. Because that level stupid, not a chance. They are not that level stupid. The reason why they skip this step in conversations with the clients, patients, user, is because they don't want to do their job properly. Because it's not difficult. It's not difficult at all. They have learned it in the educations. It's easy to understand. Nobody can misunderstand this. And still they don't do it. So yeah, I'm sorry to say that, but Norway is a collapsed country because of the employees. They just don't want to. I'm sorry.